Okay, picture this. You have just spent the last hour, maybe two, sweating over a canvas.
Right.
You've been meticulous. You've blended this perfect creamy gradient of soft pinks that transition seamlessly into these vibrant magentas, and then they sort of fade out into this deep, rich violet at the edges.
So it looks beautiful.
It looks incredible, like a blooming flower or maybe a cosmic sunset. It is balanced, it is harmonious, it is honestly the best thing you've painted all month.
Okay, with you.
And then I walk into the room, hand you this massive glob of black paint, and I tell you to smear it directly over the center of your work.
Oh, no.
Just cover it up, ruin it.
That sounds less like an art class and more like a, I don't know, a stress test for your blood pressure.
Right. It sounds like a complete nightmare. But according to the methodology taught by GRUPO RAIIM Laura Palacios, that act of absolute destruction is actually the most critical step in creation.
It is a paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you've hit on something fundamental here. Today, we are looking at a painting technique that feels less like traditional art and more like a magic trick.
A magic trick, I like that.
It's a method where you have to bury your light in total darkness just to see how bright it really is.
We're calling this deep dive the art of excavating light. And I want to be clear, this isn't just paint by numbers. We're analyzing a specific wet-on-wet spatula technique that GRUPO RAIIM Laura Palacios champions.
Yeah.
It just defies the logic I learned in high school art class.
I was going to say.
Usually painting is additive, right? You put paint on a canvas to build an image.
Correct. You add line, you add color, you add shadow. You're building up.
But this method just flips the script. You build a foundation, you bury it, and then you have to act like an archaeologist. You literally have to dig through the layers to rediscover the image you created in the first place.
Archaeologist is the perfect word for it. But let's pause for a second, because I think a lot of listeners might be thinking, why on earth would I do that?
Exactly. If I have a nice painting, why bury it?
The answer lies in depth and texture. We aren't just trying to make a pretty picture. We're trying to create a sculptural object.
Mm-hmm.
But to do that, you need to understand the physics of the materials.
Ah, yes.
If you just try this with any old paint you have lying around, you aren't going to get art. You're going to get a brown, muddy disaster.
That's where I want to start, the physics. The source material from GRUPO RAIIM Laura Palacios is incredibly specific about the medium. You have to use acrylics. And not just any acrylics, but specific ones.
Right.
My first question is why? Why is this technique exclusive to acrylics? Why couldn't I do this with my fancy oil paints that I'd have spent a fortune on?
That is the first hurdle, and it's a big one. If you try this specific excavation method with oils, you're going to run into two massive walls.
Yeah.
Chemistry and time.
Okay.
You have to remember what oil paint actually is. It dries through oxidation. It reacts with oxygen in the air to harden. That is a very, very slow process.
We're talking days, sometimes weeks, right?
Exactly. And there is a classic unbreakable rule in oil painting called fat over lean.
Yeah.
You have to layer your paint very carefully regarding the oil content.
Mm-hmm.
If you put a heavy, thick, oily layer on top of a lean layer too quickly, the top layer dries at a different rate than the bottom, and the result?
Cracking.
Cracking. Deep structural cracks as the painting cures over years.
So if I tried to slap a thick layer of wet black oil paint over a thick layer of wet pink oil paint.
It would be a structural nightmare. It would slide around, it would mix uncontrollably, and eventually it would likely crack and wrinkle. But acrylic is a different beast entirely.
Yeah.
Think of acrylic as the reinforced concrete of the art world.
Reinforced concrete? That sounds so industrial.
It is, in a way. Acrylic is a polymer emulsion, essentially liquid plastic.
Right.
It doesn't oxidize. It dries by evaporation. The water leaves the paint, and the polymer chains lock together tightly. This allows for structural, sculptural layers that dry relatively quickly and, most importantly, remain stable.
So you can build height?
You can build volume, actual 3D height with acrylics in a way that is incredibly risky with oils, especially if you want to finish the painting in one sitting.
Okay, so acrylic is our liquid plastic. That makes sense. But the notes from GRUPO RAIIM Laura Palacios keep mentioning this specific word, viscosity, or the body of the paint. They say if you don't have the right viscosity, don't even bother picking up the spatula.
This is the single most critical variable. If you get this wrong, the technique fails. And to explain it, let's use an analogy that came up in our research, which I think everyone can relate to.
Okay.
Think about the difference between a bowl of tomato soup and a bowl of thick, day-old mashed potatoes.
Okay, now I'm hungry. but I'm following.
Yeah.
Soup versus potatoes.
If you take a spoon and drag it through a bowl of tomato soup, what happens?
Nothing really. The liquid just rushes back in and fills the gap immediately. The mark disappears.
Exactly. The fluid levels itself out. That is low viscosity. In the painting world, that's your standard craft acrylic, or what's called fluid acrylic.
Right.
If you use that for this technique, the texture deflates. As the water evaporates, the paint flattens. You lose the physical record of your movement.
But if I drag a spoon through those stiff mashed potatoes...
The ridge stays. The valley stays.
Yeah.
The peak stands up against gravity. That is high viscosity.
Okay.
GRUPO RAIIM Olora Palacios emphasizes that for the spatula technique to work, the paint needs to have memory. It needs to hold the physical imprint of the artist's gesture against gravity and against the drying process. You are sculpting with color.
So we aren't painting in 2D here. We are painting in, what, 2.5D?
Precisely. If the paint is too thin, it's just going to slide off the canvas or flatten out into a puddle. You need what's often sold as heavy body acrylics. You need that resistance.
Got it. So we have our mashed potato paint. Now let's talk about the tool. We aren't using brushes here. We're using spatulas.
Painting knives.
And I'm not talking about kitchen spatulas, though with the potato analogy, maybe we should be.
We're talking about painting knives or palette knives. And using a spatula creates a completely different relationship with the canvas than a brush does. Think about it. A brush absorbs paint into its bristles and then releases it. A spatula doesn't absorb anything. It moves the material. It's a construction tool, like a trowel for cement.
It feels more aggressive, doesn't it?
It's more decisive. You can't really fiddle with a spatula the way you can with a brush.
Yeah.
And the way the source sets up the painting is very architectural. It's described as a centrifugal construction.
Centrifugal, so moving away from the center.
That's it. Imagine looking at your canvas like it's a target. The artist starts with a generous amount of the lightest color, right in the absolute center. In the primary example from the source, this is a light pink or rosado.
Okay, so we have a pink bullseye.
Then, surrounding that, they apply a ring of magenta. And finally, filling the periphery, the edges of the canvas, they use a deep violet.
I noticed something about those colors. Pink, magenta, violet, they're all kind of related. It's not like they're using blue, orange, and green.
This is a crucial point that goes back to color theory. This is called analogous harmony. These colors are neighbors on the color wheel. Now, why does that matter for a wet-on-wet technique?
Well, I'm guessing because we are about to mix them. Or they might mix.
Exactly. This is your safety net. Because you are working with wet paint, the colors are going to touch. They're going to bleed into each other where the rings meet.
Okay.
If you use complementary colors, say a red center and a green ring, what happens when red and green mix?
You get mud, brown, gross mud.
Right. You kill the chroma. But when pink mixes with magenta, you get a lovely deep pink. When magenta mixes with violet, you get a rich purple.
I see.
By using analogous colors, the painting remains vibrant even if you're a little clumsy. It creates a comfortable visual transition. It makes the gradient look seamless and glowing, almost like a light source.
That makes so much sense. It's kind of idiot-proofing, the color mixing. But there was a note about discipline here, too. You can't just be messy with the spatula, right? Even with the safety net.
No, you have to be disciplined. The source emphasizes cleaning the spatula between every single application. This is where a lot of beginners fail. They'll drag the deep violet from the edge back into the delicate light pink center.
And suddenly your light source is gone.
Gone. You've polluted the light. You need that center to be pristine because that is the bulb of your lamp. The rest is just the lampshade.
Okay, so let's look at where we are. We have this thick, heavy body acrylic. We've built a centrifugal matte pink center, magenta ring, violet edge. It's glowing. It looks like a finished abstract piece.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'd be tempted to sign it and sell it right there.
And that would be a perfectly fine painting, but it wouldn't be excavated. This brings us to the psychological turning point of this deep dive. The calm before the storm.
The moment of self-sabotage. I really struggle with this part. The instructions are to take the darkest color, that deep violet, or even a black, and apply it directly over the wet, bright pink and magenta center.
Direct coverage. Total eclipse.
But wait, if I just slap black paint onto wet pink paint, doesn't that violate everything we just said about keeping the colors pure? Why doesn't it just turn into a gray sludge immediately?
That is the million-dollar question. And the answer is in a specific technique that GRUPO RAIIM Olor Palacios calls planchar.
Planchar. That translates to iron, right? Like ironing a shirt.
Yes, but let's really break down the physics of ironing. When you iron a delicate shirt, Do you dig the tip of the iron into the fabric?
No, of course not. You'd rip it. You glide over the surface.
You glide. You are applying pressure, but the force is lateral. You are floating on top. In painting terms, you are using the surface tension and the high viscosity of the paint to your advantage.
So you're floating the black paint on top of the pink paint.
Exactly. Imagine you are frosting a cake that hasn't cooled down yet. The cake is soft. If you dig your knife in, you pull up crumbs and ruin the frosting.
Oh, that's a great visual.
You have to keep the knife flat, almost parallel to the surface, and let the frosting roll over the cake without disturbing the layer underneath.
Okay, so the angle of the spatula matters a lot.
Hugely. If your spatula is at a 45-degree angle, you are a plow. You are digging. You will mix the colors and create mud.
Right.
But if your spatula is at a 5-degree or 10-degree angle, almost flat against the canvas, you are a glider. You are laying a sheet of black paint gently on top of the wet pink paint.
That sounds incredibly stressful to execute. You need a decisive hand, as the text says.
It creates a lot of tension. If you hesitate, your hand shakes and you mix the paints. If you press too hard, you mix the paints. You have to commit. You have to trust the viscosity of the acrylic to hold that separation.
So now we have a black canvas. The beautiful pink flower is gone. We've just buried our treasure.
We have. And this is where the philosophy shifts. We move from the additive mindset, putting paint, onto the subtractive mindset.
This is the excavation.
The archaeology. You know the treasure is there. You just put it there. You have a mental map of where that pink center was. Now your job is to find it.
How? Do we use the same big spatula?
No, that would be too blunt. You switch tools. You pick up smaller, clean spatulas.
Yeah.
And you don't paint in the traditional sense. You scrape. But scrape sounds harsh. Think of it more like a snowplow clearing a road.
A snowplow. Okay.
When a snowplow moves, it pushes the top layer of snow aside to reveal the black top underneath.
Right.
It doesn't dig into the road, it skims the surface.
Right.
In our case, the road is that bottom layer of pink paint, and the snow is the black layer we just applied.
So you are slicing sideways through the wet top layer to reveal the wet bottom layer.
Yes. You start from the center, relying on your memory, and you carve outward. And the visual effect is instantaneous and shocking.
Describe it. What happens when you make that first cut?
It's a revelation. Because you are removing the black, that underlying pink doesn't just appear, it pops. It explodes with luminosity. And here's why. Contrast. Before, you had pink next to magenta. That's a low contrast transition. It's soft. But now, you have bright neon pink directly touching absolute black.
It's the window effect.
Exactly. It's like being in a pitch black room and suddenly opening a shutter to a bright sunny day. The light seems infinitely brighter because of the darkness surrounding it.
Wow.
And because the paint is that thick mashed potato consistency, the colors don't flow back together. They sit side by side like cliffs. You have a physical ridge of black paint casting a shadow into a valley of pink paint.
So you're getting texture in two ways. You get the visual texture of the color contrast, but you also get actual physical texture that you could feel with your hand if it were dry.
Correct. And that physical texture catches the light in the room. As you walk past the painting, the ridges of the acrylic cast tiny shadows, making the painting feel alive and dynamic. It stops being a flat image and becomes an object.
I want to go back to the black paint for a second. The sources mention that GRUPO RAIIM Olora Palacios emphasizes using black or deep violet for that top layer. Could you do this with, say, white paint on top? Could I hide a dark center under a white sheet?
Technically, yes. The physics work the same. Aesthetically, it's much weaker. Because of how we perceive light. Darkness is the mechanism that gives light its drama. Without the shadow, the light has no context. If you cover a dark center with white, you just get a pastel smudge. It looks washed out. But the black acts as a framing device. It pushes the light forward toward the viewer. It screams, "Look here."
It's like a spotlight in a theater. The rest of the stage has to be dark for the spotlight to matter.
Precisely. And while the source teaches this with the pink, magenta, violet triad, the principle is universal. You can use this with any color scheme, provided you understand the light transition dark structure.
So I could do a fiery one, like a bright yellow center, orange ring, red edge.
Absolutely. Yellow center, orange ring, red edge, then cover it all with a deep blue or black. As long as you follow the physics high viscosity and the technique planter and excavate, it will work. It's a system. It's repeatable engineering.
It really is. It takes the mystery out of inspiration and turns it into a process. You have preparation, getting the right viscosity, construction, building the analogous color map, destruction, the planchar cover-up, and finally, revelation, the excavation.
And notice the emotional arc there. You build something safe and pretty. then you take a risk and destroy it. And only through that destruction do you get something profound.
It's a weird mix of aggression and delicacy, isn't it?
Yeah.
You have to be aggressive enough to smear black paint over your hard work, but delicate enough to scrape it away without ripping the canvas.
Decisive yet sensitive. That seems to be the mantra here. And frankly, it's a great lesson for any creative work. We often get so attached to the early stages of a project because they look nice.
We don't want to mess it up.
We protect it. But this teaching shows that you have to be willing to lose the pretty version to find the deep version. The first layer, that pink gradient, was pretty, but it was flat.
Yeah.
The final result, with the scars of the spatula and the heavy black contrast,
Yeah.
that has history. That has grit.
It's the difference between a pristine postcard and a place you've actually traveled to.
Beautifully put.
So, for the listener who might be staring at a blank canvas, or maybe just staring at a problem at work that feels a bit stuck, what's the takeaway here, beyond just buy heavy-body acrylics?
The takeaway is to embrace the subtractive process. We live in a culture that is obsessed with add more detail, add more data, add more noise, add more layers.
More is more.
But this technique proves that sometimes the most powerful move is to cover everything up, simplify the field, and then selectively remove what isn't necessary.
To find the light that's already there.
Exactly. The light was there the whole time. You didn't paint the light in the final step. You just revealed it. You cleared away the noise to show the signal.
I love that. And I think I'm finally brave enough to try it, though I might practice on a small canvas first before I ruin a masterpiece.
That is probably wise. Get the planchar angle right first. Remember, 10 degrees and not 45. Glide, don't dig.
Glide, don't dig. Got it. Well, thanks for taking us through the physics and the philosophy of the excavation of light. It's been a fascinating look at how destruction can be creative.
It was a pleasure.
And to you listening, here is a final thought to chew on before you go. We talked about excavating light in paint, but ask yourself this. In your own work, whatever it is you do, are you trying to build brilliance by just piling more stuff on top? Or do you have the courage to cover it all up, quiet the noise, and see what happens when you start taking things away? Sometimes the masterpiece isn't what you put in, but what you dig out. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.